The Tremaine plantation sat like a pristine white jewel against the verdant backdrop of South Carolina's low country. Its columns reached toward the heavens as if in prayer, though no amount of supplication could cleanse the sins committed within its walls. In the summer of 1836, the estate was known throughout Charleston as a model of prosperity. Its rice fields yielded abundant harvests, its horses were the envy of neighboring planters, and its mistress, Eleanor Tremaine, was respected for maintaining such success despite her widowhood. Eleanor had buried her husband, Colonel William Tremaine, 3 winters prior. While most widows might have crumbled under the weight of managing such a vast estate, Eleanor had thrived. The plantation's productivity had actually increased under her stewardship, a fact that puzzled many of Charleston's elite gentlemen. "Mrs. Tremaine, you continue to astonish us all," remarked Judge Holloway at a summer soiree on the veranda. "Your cotton yield has exceeded even the Pinckney plantation this season." Eleanor, a woman of 45 with sharp features that might have been beautiful in youth but had hardened with time, smiled with practiced restraint. "God provides for those who provide for themselves, Judge Holloway." What the good judge and Charleston society didn't see was how Eleanor provided for herself. Behind the mansion's gleaming facade, beyond the manicured gardens where her 3 daughters entertained callers, lay a separate building obscured by a grove of live oaks. The slaves called it the breeding house, though never within earshot of white folks. That evening, as guests departed and twilight descended upon the plantation, Eleanor retired to her study where ledgers lay open on a mahogany desk. The plantation's overseer, a brutish man named Silas Webb, waited for her with his hat clutched in calloused hands. "The new girl arrived from the Dalton auction," he reported. "Strong back, wide hips. Should fetch a good price for her first offspring." Eleanor nodded, without looking up from her calculations. "Have her examined by Dr. Parnell tomorrow. I won't pay premium if she's barren." Her quill scratched figures with methodical precision. "And what of Mercy's child?" "Born this morning. Healthy boy. Good size." A smile, cold as January frost, crossed Eleanor's thin lips. "Excellent. That makes 3 this month. The traders from Georgia will be pleased." What remained unspoken was that Mercy was not a slave, but Eleanor's own daughter's handmaid, a girl of 16 who had been impregnated on Eleanor's orders. The child would be raised as a slave, his maternal lineage erased from record. In the East Wing, Eleanor's 3 daughters, Caroline, Josephine, and Beatrice, prepared for bed, each harboring secrets that would soon converge into a horror none could escape. Caroline, the eldest at 22, stared out her window toward the slave quarters, her hand unconsciously drifting to her abdomen. Josephine, 20, wrote feverishly in a journal she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, and Beatrice, barely 17, wept silently into her pillow, terrified of her mother's plans for her upcoming birthday. None knew that a newly arrived house slave named Isaiah was watching the Tremaine mansion from the shadows of the oak grove. His sister had disappeared into Eleanor's breeding program 3 months earlier, and he had allowed himself to be sold to the Tremaine estate with one purpose: to discover the truth and somehow escape with her. The cicadas screamed into the humid night as a storm gathered on the horizon. By morning, the first drops of rain would fall on the Tremaine plantation, but they would be nothing compared to the deluge of secrets threatening to drown them all. Isaiah's first morning at the Tremaine plantation began before dawn, his body still aching from the journey from Virginia. He had been purchased alongside 5 other men at the Charleston slave market, all selected for their strength and vitality. Now, as he scrubbed the marble entrance hall under the watchful eye of Agatha, the head house slave, he carefully listened for any mention of his sister, Ruth. "You keep your head down and your ears closed in this house," Agatha whispered as she passed, her voice barely audible. "Curiosity kills more than cats here." Isaiah nodded imperceptibly, but continued his methodical eavesdropping. The Tremaine household was already stirring above him. He could hear the soft footfalls of the daughters moving between rooms, the occasional sharp command from Eleanor Tremaine herself, and the hurried responses of household slaves. By mid-morning, he had been reassigned to the stables, where he met Jonas, an older slave who had been on the plantation for nearly 30 years. Jonas had the hollow look of a man who had witnessed unspeakable things. "You're new," Jonas observed as they mucked out stalls. "Where'd they bring you from?" "Virginia," Isaiah replied cautiously. "Hanover County." Jonas nodded, his eyes constantly scanning for any approaching overseers. "You got purpose here?" "Most men they bring in lately got a purpose." Before Isaiah could respond, the stable doors swung open and Silas Webb entered, trailing mud from the morning's rain. Both men immediately lowered their eyes and intensified their work. "You!" Webb pointed at Isaiah. "Mrs. Tremaine wants the new stock examined. Take this message to Dr. Parnell in town." He thrust a sealed envelope toward Isaiah. The errand was unexpected good fortune. Isaiah had hoped to find some way to scout the plantation grounds, and now he was being sent beyond its boundaries. Perhaps he could gather information in town, or at least get a better sense of the plantation's layout upon his return. The journey to Charleston took nearly an hour on foot. Dr. Parnell's office sat near the harbor, a respectable building with a brass plate announcing his medical practice. Isaiah was directed to the back entrance, where he handed over the envelope to a dour-faced assistant. "Wait," the assistant commanded, disappearing inside. Isaiah used these precious minutes of relative freedom to observe his surroundings. Nearby, two white gentlemen conversed in low tones. "Tremaine's widow is shipping another dozen next week," one said, checking his pocket watch. "Fine specimens, if a bit young." "The market's hungry for domestic stock," replied the other, "especially with the import restrictions. Tremaine's breeding program is the most efficient in the state." Isaiah's heart raced. This confirmed what he had suspected. The Tremaine plantation was engaged in slave breeding, a practice that had intensified since the prohibition of international slave trade. His sister could indeed be there, forced into bearing children who would be sold away from her. The assistant returned with another sealed envelope. "For Mrs. Tremaine only," he instructed. On his return journey, Isaiah took a slightly different route, one that allowed him a view of the rear of the plantation property. Behind the main house and beyond the kitchen gardens, he spotted the building partially hidden by trees. Unlike the slave cabins, this structure was well built with actual glass windows, though they were covered with heavy drapes. A white uniformed woman, not a slave, entered through a locked door, carrying what appeared to be medical supplies. That night, as the other field hands collapsed into exhausted sleep, Isaiah slipped away to meet Phyllis, an elderly kitchen slave who had taken pity on him. They met behind the smokehouse, where the pungent aroma of curing meat would mask their whispers. "My sister," Isaiah began. "Her name is Ruth. She would have arrived 3 months ago." Phyllis's weathered face creased with sorrow. "That building you saw, they call it the infirmary to decent folk. That's where they keep the breeding women." "Is she there?" Isaiah's voice cracked. "There was a Ruth came in the spring, pretty girl, about 17. When Isaiah nodded, Phyllis continued reluctantly. "She's there. But listen to me, boy. Whatever you're thinking, stop now. Ain't nobody ever freed anybody from that place. Mrs. Tremaine has the law, the church, and the gun all on her side." "The daughters," Isaiah pressed. "Are they involved?" Phyllis glanced nervously toward the big house. "Eldest one, Miss Caroline. She's her mother's daughter through and through. Miss Josephine, she writes things down, dangerous things. And the young one, Miss Beatrice." Phyllis's voice dropped even lower. "She's next, soon as she turns 18. Mrs. Tremaine has plans for her." "What plans?" Isaiah asked, dread mounting in his chest. "Same plans she had for the others. Breeding ain't just for slaves on this plantation." Phyllis suddenly stiffened. "Someone's coming." "Go!" Isaiah melted into the shadows as the night watchman passed, lantern swinging. In his quarters, sleep evaded him as Phyllis's words echoed in his mind. The horror of the Tremaine plantation was greater than he had imagined, and at its heart was a mystery that went beyond even the brutal practice of slave breeding. What was Eleanor Tremaine doing to her own daughters? Josephine Tremaine's hands trembled as she carefully lifted the floorboard beneath her bed. The household had finally quieted. Her mother was in her study tallying the day's accounts. Caroline was entertaining the son of a neighboring plantation owner in the parlor, and Beatrice had cried herself to sleep after another one of Mother's conversations about her duties to the family. From the hidden compartment, Josephine extracted a leather-bound journal and a small inkwell. Her documentation had begun innocently enough 2 years ago. Simple observations about the plantation's operations, notes on the strange comings and goings of Dr. Parnell, records of slaves who disappeared or suddenly appeared. But as the pattern emerged, her journaling had become both a compulsion and a terrible risk. August 17th, 1836. Another girl taken to the infirmary today. Her name is Ruth. This makes 17 women currently held there. Mother has ordered special nutrition for them all. Fresh meat daily and molasses, items denied to regular field hands. Dr. Parnell visits twice weekly now. Josephine's quill paused above the page as she recalled the terrible truth she had discovered last winter. Her father's death had not been the heart seizure everyone believed. She had found the real story hidden in her mother's private ledger, a book separate from the plantation accounts, kept locked in a hidden compartment of her writing desk. Josephine had discovered it by accident while searching for sealing wax. The leather-bound volume detailed 20 years of a breeding program so methodical and cold-blooded it defied comprehension. Not only were selected slave women being forced into pregnancy, but Eleanor had been experimenting with bloodline improvements by introducing different stocks into the plantation's population. Most horrifying of all were the notations beside her sisters' names. Caroline had apparently been inducted into the program at 18, not as a breeder, but as an overseer of the women's maternal health. Beside Beatrice's name was a date, September 30th, 1836, her 18th birthday, with the notation, "First breeding scheduled." A soft knock at her door nearly caused Josephine to overturn her inkwell. She hastily replaced the floorboard before calling out, "Yes?" The door opened to reveal one of the house slaves, Esther, her eyes downcast. "Miss Caroline asks for your presence in the parlor, Miss Josephine. Mr. Blackwood has brought his brother to call." Josephine composed herself. "Tell her I'll be down shortly." After Esther left, Josephine hesitated. These social calls were never coincidental. Mother orchestrated each one, assessing potential husbands for their genetic qualities and family connections. The Blackwoods were an old family with substantial holdings. If Mother approved, she would expect Josephine to encourage the courtship. The thought made her stomach turn. Not because young Blackwood was unappealing, she had no idea if he was or wasn't, but because she understood now that marriage was just another breeding arrangement in her mother's grand design. Downstairs, the parlor glowed with candlelight. Caroline sat perfectly poised on the settee, laughing at something Thomas Blackwood had said. Beside him stood a younger man, presumably his brother, looking uncomfortable in formal attire. "Ah, here she is," Caroline announced. "Josephine, you remember Thomas Blackwood, and this is his brother, Lieutenant James Blackwood, recently returned from military service on the frontier." Josephine cursed appropriately, studying the younger Blackwood. He was perhaps 25, with a soldier's bearing and watchful eyes that seemed to assess the room for threats. Something in his gaze suggested he was as uncomfortable with this social ritual as she was. "Miss Tremaine," he acknowledged with a bow, "your sister speaks highly of your accomplishments." "Caroline is too kind," Josephine replied, taking a seat. "I understand you've been on the frontier, Lieutenant. That must have been quite an adventure." As James began describing his experiences in the Western Territories, Josephine noticed Isaiah, the new house slave, entering with a tray of refreshments. Their eyes met briefly, too briefly for the others to notice, but long enough for Josephine to sense something important. This man was different from the others. There was purpose in his movements, awareness in his carefully downcast eyes. The conversation flowed predictably until Eleanor Tremaine made her entrance, strategically timed to appear as though she wasn't orchestrating the entire evening. She assessed Lieutenant Blackwood with the same clinical eye she used when evaluating new livestock. "Lieutenant," she said warmly, though the warmth never reached her eyes, "how fortunate we are to have you join us tonight. I understand your family's rice plantation adjoins our southern fields. Perhaps tomorrow you might join us for a tour of the Tremaine operations. We have some innovative methods I believe would interest a progressive young planter." Josephine felt a chill. Her mother never invited outsiders to tour the plantation without specific purpose. What role did Lieutenant Blackwood play in her schemes? Later that night, as Josephine updated her journal, she added a new entry. "Mother has taken interest in Lieutenant James Blackwood. He is to tour the plantation tomorrow, though I suspect not the infirmary. Caroline seems to have prior knowledge of this arrangement. I fear Beatrice's birthday approaches too quickly. Whatever Mother intends, I must find a way to stop it. Perhaps the new house slave, Isaiah, could be an ally. There is something in his manner that suggests he is not what he appears to be." Outside her window, thunder rolled across the sky as another summer storm approached. Josephine couldn't help but feel it was an omen of the tempest about to engulf them all. Dr. Maxwell Parnell prided himself on precision. His instruments were always meticulously cleaned, his records immaculately kept, and his observations clinically detached. These qualities had made him invaluable to Eleanor Tremaine's operation over the past decade. As he made his rounds through what the plantation slaves fearfully called the breeding house, but was officially documented as the infirmary, he maintained the same professional demeanor he would in his Charleston practice. The building contained 12 rooms, each housing 1 or 2 women depending on their stage of pregnancy or recovery. Currently, 16 women occupied the facility, with 3 in their final month and 4 who had delivered within the past fortnight. "Subject 23 shows excellent recovery," he noted to Nurse Hammond, a stern woman who had been dishonorably dismissed from a Boston hospital before finding more lucrative employment with Mrs. Tremaine. "Milk production abundant, infant gaining weight appropriately." Subject 23, or Ruth, as her brother desperately sought her, sat in a rocking chair by the window, nursing an infant boy born just 10 days earlier. Her eyes were vacant, her once vibrant spirit crushed by months of captivity and the knowledge that her child would be taken from her within weeks, sold as valuable plantation-born stock. "And the Johansson Protocol?" Nurse Hammond inquired, referring to a regimen of herbs and dietary restrictions designed to increase fertility. "Continue for subjects 17 through 22, Dr. Parnell replied. "Discontinue for 23 until the infant is weaned. Mrs. Tremaine wants her ready for the next cycle by November." Their clinical discussion was interrupted by a knock at the main door. Nurse Hammond excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with a sealed note. "From the house," she said. "Mrs. Tremaine requests your attendance at dinner tonight. She's entertaining the Blackwood brothers and wishes to discuss their bloodlines." Dr. Parnell nodded. These dinners were part of Eleanor's meticulous planning, assessing potential husbands for her daughters, not for love or compatibility, but for genetic traits she wished to incorporate into her program. The doctor had long ago stopped questioning the morality of his involvement. The research opportunity was too valuable, the payment too generous. As he completed his rounds, he paused outside a locked room at the end of the hallway. Unlike the others, this one had no window in the door, and only he and Eleanor possessed keys. Inside, carefully preserved in jars of formaldehyde, were the failures. The deformed infants, the stillbirths, the experimental crossings that had produced unviable offspring. Eleanor insisted on keeping them, studying them for clues to improve her breeding program. Beside them, meticulous records detailed lineages, traits, and outcomes. What no one else knew, not even Nurse Hammond, was that some specimens in that room had come not from slave women, but from Eleanor's own family line. The true horror of the Tremaine plantation went beyond slavery into something far more perverse. Eleanor was breeding her own daughters, creating a controlled lineage she believed would produce superior human specimens. Meanwhile, outside the main house, Isaiah worked methodically in the garden, positioning himself to overhear conversations through open windows. The anticipated plantation tour for Lieutenant Blackwood was underway, with Eleanor showcasing her rice fields and cotton operations. "Your irrigation system is quite innovative, Mrs. Tremaine," Blackwood observed as they returned to the front portico. "I'm impressed by your agricultural knowledge." "Necessity breeds innovation, Lieutenant," Eleanor replied. "When my husband passed, many expected the plantation to fail under a woman's management. I was determined to prove them wrong. And you certainly have. Your crop yields are the envy of the county." Eleanor's smile was calculated. "But you haven't seen our most profitable operation, perhaps after dinner, if you're interested in animal husbandry." Isaiah, pretending to prune nearby shrubs, felt his blood run cold. The animal husbandry building was what the slaves called the breeding house. Was Eleanor actually planning to show this military man her operation? If so, it meant she either trusted him implicitly or intended to involve him in some way. That evening, as Isaiah served at dinner, he observed the interactions closely. Caroline sat beside Thomas Blackwood, engaging him with practiced charm. Josephine was paired with Lieutenant James, though her conversation seemed strained. Beatrice, the youngest, picked at her food silently, flinching whenever her mother addressed her. "Lieutenant," Eleanor said as dessert was served, "I understand your family has a particular interest in selective breeding. Your father's racehorses are legendary." "Yes, ma'am," James replied, "though I confess the credit belongs to our stable master. I've been away too long to claim any expertise. Still, you understand the principles, selecting for desirable traits, maintaining careful bloodlines." Eleanor sipped her wine. "After dinner, I'd like to show you a project that might interest you. Something few outsiders have seen." Isaiah, refilling water glasses, nearly dropped the pitcher. He had to warn Phyllis and somehow get word to Josephine, who he suspected might be a potential ally. The tour Eleanor planned would almost certainly include the infirmary, where his sister was held captive. As he entered the kitchen with the empty pitcher, he whispered urgently to Phyllis, "She's showing him the breeding house tonight." Phyllis's eyes widened in alarm. "Then she means to bring him into the operation. Nobody sees that place unless they're involved." "I need to get in there," Isaiah said. "My sister." "You'll get yourself killed," Phyllis hissed. "And her too. There has to be a way." Phyllis hesitated, then slipped him a small key. "Back door to the wash house. It connects to the infirmary through an underground passage, for bringing in supplies without folks seeing." "But Isaiah," her voice cracked with fear, "if you're caught, we all suffer." As thunder crashed outside and rain began to fall in sheets, Isaiah knew tonight might be his only chance. With the plantation focused on the Blackwoods' visit and the storm providing cover, he could attempt to reach Ruth. But what he would discover in the depths of the Tremaine infirmary would be far worse than even he had imagined. A horror that extended beyond slavery into a perversion of science and human dignity that would shake the foundations of Charleston society if ever revealed. Beatrice Tremaine stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, hardly recognizing the hollow-eyed girl who stared back. In less than 6 weeks, she would turn 18, and her mother had made it increasingly clear what that milestone meant. The new dresses, the specialized diet, the frequent examinations by Dr. Parnell, all were preparations for what Eleanor clinically referred to as Beatrice's introduction to family duty. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. Josephine entered without waiting for permission, quickly closing the door behind her. "We need to talk," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "About Mother's plans for you." Beatrice's hands trembled in her lap. "I can't, Josie. I just can't." Josephine sat beside her sister on the bed. "Listen to me. What happened to Caroline? What's happening in the infirmary? It's all part of something terrible. Mother isn't just breeding slaves. I know what she's doing." Beatrice interrupted, her voice barely audible. "Caroline told me, said it was my duty to the family, to the bloodline. That Father started it all before I was even born." Josephine's face drained of color. "Caroline admitted it to you, that our father was selecting for traits in slaves, in livestock, in us." Beatrice's voice broke. "Caroline says it's scientific, that Mother is continuing his work, that the Tremaine line will be superior because of it." "It's monstrous," Josephine hissed, "and I won't let it happen to you." Outside, lightning illuminated the room in harsh white flashes, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The storm that had threatened all day had finally broken, rain lashing against the windows like desperate fingers seeking entry. "I've been keeping records," Josephine continued, withdrawing her journal from a pocket hidden in her skirts. "Everything I've observed, overheard. Mother's ledger, Dr. Parnell's visits, the women in the infirmary, and now she's bringing Lieutenant Blackwood into it. James?" Beatrice looked up sharply. "What does he have to do with this?" "I don't know yet. But Mother never shows the breeding operation to outsiders. If she's revealing it to him, she has plans." Josephine leaned closer. "We need allies, Bea. I believe the new house slave, Isaiah, might help us." Beatrice's eyes widened in alarm. "A slave? Josie, that's madness. If Mother found out, his sister is in the infirmary. He came here deliberately to find her." Josephine clutched her sister's hands. "Tonight, while Mother is occupied with the Blackwoods, he's going to try to reach her." A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. Both girls froze, staring at the door. After a moment of terrible silence, footsteps moved away down the corridor. "We have to be careful," Beatrice whispered. "Caroline reports everything to Mother. And Agatha, the head house slave, she's Mother's eyes and ears. Not all the slaves are loyal to her. Phyllis in the kitchen, she's helping Isaiah." Josephine stood, moving to the window to watch rain cascade down the glass. "Bea, have you ever wondered about our births, about our mothers?" Beatrice looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Mother bore us all." "Did she?" "I found entries in Father's private journal. He refers to surrogates and host mothers." "I think," Josephine swallowed hard, "I think we might have been born of the breeding program ourselves." The revelation hung in the air between them, too monstrous to fully comprehend. If true, it meant their entire existence was the product of selective breeding, their own mothers, perhaps women held captive in what was now called the infirmary. Before Beatrice could respond, a soft tap came at the door, a distinctive pattern that Josephine recognized as Phyllis's signal. She opened the door a crack to find not Phyllis, but Isaiah, his clothes soaked from the rain, his eyes wide with urgency. "Miss Josephine," he whispered, "your mother is taking the lieutenant to the infirmary now. I need your help to get my sister out." Josephine glanced back at Beatrice, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We'll help you," Josephine said, "but in return, you must help us expose everything that happens here." "There's more," Isaiah said, his voice strained. "When I used the passage from the washhouse, I found something, a hidden room beneath the infirmary, with jars—" He couldn't continue for a moment. "Jars with infants, records with names, dates, your family names." Beatrice made a small, wounded sound like a dying animal. Josephine steadied herself against the doorframe. "Show us," she said finally. "Show us everything." As the three unlikely allies prepared to venture into the storm, Caroline Tremaine watched from the shadows of the hallway, her face an unreadable mask. In her hand was a small pistol, the one their father had given her for protection before his death. The same pistol, though only she knew it. that she had used to end his life when he had threatened to expose Eleanor's perversion of his breeding program. Caroline had made her choice long ago, embracing her mother's vision of creating a superior lineage. She would not allow her sister's weakness to destroy everything they had built. The storm raged as four separate paths, Eleanor and Lieutenant Blackwood, Isaiah and the sisters, Dr. Parnell in his secret laboratory, and Caroline with her deadly purpose, all converged on the infirmary where the darkest secrets of the Tremaine plantation waited to be unleashed. The rain had transformed the manicured grounds of Tremaine Plantation into a treacherous swamp. Isaiah led the Tremaine sisters along a barely visible path that skirted the formal gardens, keeping to the shadows of massive oak trees. Lightning periodically illuminated their progress in stark, frozen tableau. Three figures hunched against the deluge, moving like spectres between worlds. "The wash house is there." Isaiah pointed to a squat brick building some 50 yards from the main house. "The tunnel entrance is beneath the copper tubs." Josephine's journal was secured inside her bodice, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the rain. Beatrice followed close behind, her nightdress already soaked through, her bare feet mud-spattered. Neither sister had ever ventured outside the main house without proper attire and escorts. This midnight journey, in storm and secrecy, marked their first true act of rebellion. They reached the wash-house without incident. Once inside, Isaiah moved with practiced efficiency, shifting a massive copper washing tub to reveal a trapdoor built into the stone floor. The hinges protested as he lifted it, exposing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. "How did you know about this?" Josephine asked, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering on the roof. "Phyllis," Isaiah replied simply. "She's worked here 40 years, knows every secret passage built for servants to move unseen." Beatrice peered down into the blackness. "We need light." Isaiah produced a small tin lantern, lighting it with trembling hands. The flame cast their faces in ghoulish relief as they began their descent into the earth beneath Tremaine Plantation. The tunnel was surprisingly well constructed, with brick walls and a packed dirt floor. It extended straight for about 50 yards before branching in two directions. "The right path leads to the infirmary," Isaiah explained. "The left, I don't know, it wasn't on Phyllis's instructions." Josephine hesitated only briefly. "We take the left first. If this connects to Mother's secret room, it may contain evidence we need." The left passage continued for another 20 yards before terminating at a heavy oak door, reinforced with iron bands. It was secured with a substantial padlock. "We can't break that," Beatrice whispered. Josephine withdrew a ring of keys from her pocket. "I took these from Mother's study last week. I've been waiting for an opportunity to use them." The third key fit the padlock. The mechanism yielded with a reluctant click that seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Isaiah pushed the door open, raising the lantern to illuminate what lay beyond. The chamber was small, but meticulously organized. Glass-fronted cabinets lined the walls, each containing rows of specimen jars. A large desk dominated the center, its surface covered with open ledgers and scientific instruments. The air smelled of chemicals and something else, a sweet, cloying scent that caught in the throat. Beatrice gasped, stumbling backward. "Oh, God!" Inside each jar floated a perfectly preserved human fetus at various stages of development. Neat labels affixed to each jar detailed parentage, gestation period, and cause of termination. Most disturbing were the notations indicating deliberate terminations for observed defects or undesirable traits. Josephine approached the desk with mounting horror, scanning the open pages of a leather-bound journal. "These are Dr. Parnell's research notes," she whispered. "He's been conducting experiments on selective breeding, using slaves as test subjects." Isaiah had moved to examine the specimen cabinets more closely, his lantern illuminating the grotesque contents. "These dates go back 20 years, he observed, "well before your mother took control of the plantation." It was our father's project initially, Josephine confirmed, still reading, but Mother expanded it after his death, made it more systematic. She turned a page and froze. Isaiah, these aren't all from slave women. She pointed to a series of entries marked with the Tremaine family crest. According to the records, Eleanor Tremaine had been using surrogates to bear children fathered by selected men, children who were then raised as the legitimate Tremaine daughters. That's why Caroline is so devoted to Mother, Josephine realized, her voice hollow. She knows. She's been part of it from the beginning. But why? Beatrice asked, her young face contorted with revulsion and confusion. What purpose could this possibly serve? Before Josephine could answer, they heard voices echoing from the right tunnel, the one leading to the infirmary. Eleanor's crisp tones were unmistakable, along with the man's deeper response. Lieutenant Blackwood was being given the tour Eleanor had promised at dinner. We have to hide, Isaiah urged, extinguishing the lantern. If they find us here— No, Josephine interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. This ends tonight. I'm taking these records. They're evidence of crimes that even Charleston society can't ignore. She began gathering ledgers and journals, stuffing them into a canvas sack she found beneath the desk. Isaiah reopened the tunnel door. We need to reach the infirmary first, he insisted. My sister is still there, and now your mother is bringing Blackwood there as well. Josephine nodded grimly. Beatrice, take these back to the house. Hide them in my room beneath the floorboards. Isaiah and I will continue to the infirmary. Beatrice clutched her sister's arm. You can't leave me alone. What if Caroline— Caroline doesn't know we've discovered this, Josephine assured her, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Go quickly and tell no one what we've found. If we're not back by dawn, take these documents to Judge Holloway in Charleston. Only him, do you understand? With obvious reluctance, Beatrice took the sack and retreated into the tunnel, leaving Josephine and Isaiah to continue toward the infirmary. They retraced their steps to the junction, then took the right fork, moving as silently as possible. The voices grew louder as they approached another door, this one slightly ajar, spilling lamplight into the passageway. The breeding program produces approximately 30 infants annually, they heard Eleanor explaining, her tone as casual as if she were discussing crop rotation. With careful selection, we've increased birth weight by 12% and reduced infant mortality to less than 5%. Quite remarkable results. Indeed, Mrs. Tremaine, came Blackwood's reply, his voice strangely neutral. And these women are all slaves? Primarily, yes, though we've had success with certain mixed lineage surrogates as well. The key is precise record-keeping and controlled conditions. Isaiah's face contorted with rage. Josephine placed a restraining hand on his arm, shaking her head in warning. They needed to understand the full extent of the operation before acting. And you believe these methods could be applied more broadly? Blackwood asked. With the right oversight, absolutely. Imagine plantations throughout the South producing not just cotton and tobacco, but human stock, specifically bred for desired traits. Strength, endurance, intelligence, within limits, of course. The economic potential is enormous. And your own daughters. Do they understand their role in this enterprise? There was a pause before Eleanor answered. Caroline embraces our vision completely. Josephine has a scientific mind, but lacks proper commitment to progress. And Beatrice, well, she comes of age next month. Her first breeding has already been arranged. With whom? Blackwood's voice had taken on a sharper edge. Why, Lieutenant? Eleanor replied with a cold laugh. With you, of course. Your bloodline, your military bearing, your intellectual capacity, all excellent traits to introduce to our program. Of course, you'd be compensated generously. Your brother Thomas has already agreed to a similar arrangement with Caroline. In the tunnel, Josephine stifled a gasp of horror. Isaiah's hand moved to the knife concealed in his belt, but again, Josephine restrained him. They needed more evidence, more witnesses, before confronting Eleanor Tremaine. I see, Blackwood said after a long pause. And Dr. Parnell oversees the medical aspects? He's been invaluable. His research on hereditary traits is decades ahead of European science. Together, we're perfecting methods that will revolutionize human cultivation. As Eleanor continued detailing her monstrous vision, Isaiah and Josephine eased the door open wider, gaining a partial view of the infirmary's main corridor. At the far end, Eleanor stood with Lieutenant Blackwood outside one of the patient rooms. Dr. Parnell had joined them, offering clinical commentary on the women visible through the observation windows. "My sister," Isaiah whispered urgently. "She would be in the recovery ward, third door on the right, according to Phyllis." Josephine nodded. "We need a distraction." Before they could devise a plan, the infirmary's main entrance burst open. Caroline Tremaine stood in the doorway, rain-drenched and wild-eyed, her father's pistol gripped in one white-knuckled hand. "Mother," she called out, "Josephine and Beatrice are missing, and I found this in the tunnel." She held up Josephine's journal, pages fluttering. "They know everything. They're planning to expose us." Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of fury. "Find them," she ordered. "Search every building, every field. They cannot be allowed to leave the plantation." In the hidden passageway, Josephine and Isaiah exchanged glances of grim determination. Their opportunity for stealth had vanished. Now, their only hope was to reach Ruth and escape before the Tremaine plantation claimed more victims of its unspeakable horrors. Lieutenant James Blackwood had seen his share of atrocities during his military service on the frontier. He had witnessed the aftermath of massacres, the desolation of disease-ravaged villages, the cruel indifference of nature to human suffering. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the cold, methodical evil of Eleanor Tremaine's breeding program. As Caroline's announcement echoed through the infirmary, he seized the momentary confusion to distance himself from Eleanor and Dr. Parnell. His right hand moved to the interior pocket of his coat, where he carried not just the commission that identified him as a lieutenant in the United States Army, but also as a federal investigator sent to Charleston following disturbing reports of illegal slave-breeding operations. "Mrs. Tremaine," he said evenly, "I think we should all remain calm. Perhaps your daughter simply went for a walk." "Do not patronize me, Lieutenant," Eleanor snapped. "Caroline, alert Mr. Webb and the overseers. I want every slave questioned, every building searched." She turned to Dr. Parnell. "Secure the records. If necessary, prepare to relocate the subjects." As Caroline hurried out into the storm, Blackwood noticed a flicker of movement at the far end of the corridor. A door opening slightly, revealing a man's face for just an instant before withdrawing. The new house slave, he realized. The one who had served at dinner with such watchful intensity. "Dr. Parnell," Eleanor continued, oblivious to Blackwood's observation, "perhaps you should show the lieutenant your laboratory while I oversee the search." Parnell nodded. "This way, sir. You'll find our research protocols quite fascinating." Blackwood followed the doctor down a side passage, calculating his options. His original mission had been simple reconnaissance, confirm the rumors, document the operation, then return with federal marshals to shut it down. But with the Tremaine daughters now in danger and a full plantation manhunt underway, the timetable had accelerated drastically. "Our breeding methodologies are based on principles already well established in animal husbandry," Parnell was explaining as they descended a narrow staircase. "But we've refined the process for human subjects with remarkable results." "And these results are documented?" Blackwood inquired, his tone carefully neutral. "Extensively. 20 years of data, tracking multiple generations. Proof that selective traits can be emphasized through careful breeding." Parnell's voice held the dispassionate enthusiasm of a man discussing crop rotation rather than forced human reproduction. They reached a heavy door at the bottom of the stairs. Parnell withdrew a key from his waistcoat, then hesitated, studying Blackwood's face. "You seem troubled, Lieutenant." "Having second thoughts about Mrs. Tremaine's offer," Blackwood maintained his composure with military discipline. "I'm merely processing the scale of the operation. It's more comprehensive than I anticipated." Parnell seemed satisfied with this answer and unlocked the door. "This is where we maintain our records and specimens. You'll understand the scientific significance once you—" He stopped abruptly, staring at the disarray inside the laboratory. "Someone's been here. The records. Some are missing." Blackwood peered over the doctor's shoulder, noting the open cabinets and cleared desk space. Perhaps Mrs. Tremaine already moved them. No, this was just as I left it this afternoon." Parnell moved frantically among the specimen jars, checking labels. "The Tremaine lineage documents are gone, and the breeding projections for the next generation." Blackwood seized his opportunity. "Doctor, I think we should return upstairs. If there's been a breach of security—" A piercing scream cut through the air, emanating from somewhere above them. Parnell's head jerked up. That came from the recovery ward. Both men raced back up the stairs, Blackwood deliberately lagging behind. As they reached the main corridor, chaos greeted them. 2 slave women had escaped their rooms and were fighting with Nurse Hammond. At the far end of the hall, Eleanor Tremaine was shouting orders to house slaves who had been summoned from the mansion. In the midst of this disorder, Blackwood spotted the slave from earlier, Isaiah, ushering a young woman and what appeared to be Josephine Tremaine toward a side exit. The younger Tremaine daughter was nowhere to be seen. Blackwood made an instant decision. Reaching inside his coat, he withdrew not a weapon, but a whistle. Standard army issue with a distinctive pitch that carried over battlefield noise. He blew 3 sharp blasts, a prearranged signal to the federal marshals waiting at the perimeter of the plantation. The sound cut through the commotion like a knife. Eleanor Tremaine turned toward him, her face contorting from confusion to fury as understanding dawned. "You," she hissed, "you're not here as a potential breeder." "Federal investigator," Blackwood confirmed, producing his identification. "This operation is over, Mrs. Tremaine." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "You fool, do you think I haven't protected myself? Half the judiciary in Charleston benefits from my research. The governor himself has invested in our expansion plans." "Perhaps," Blackwood acknowledged, "but I answer to Washington, not Charleston. And the illegal slave trade, including breeding programs like yours, has become a federal priority." Dr. Parnell began backing away, clearly calculating his own escape. Blackwood kept one eye on him while addressing Eleanor. "You're finished, Mrs. Tremaine. The only question is whether you face justice alone or implicate your powerful friends in an attempt to save yourself." Eleanor's response was not what Blackwood expected. Rather than denial or bargaining, her face settled into a cold smile. "Lieutenant, your federal jurisdiction ends at the boundaries of this plantation. My overseers are armed, loyal, and well compensated. Your marshals may never make it past our gates." She raised her voice. "Mr. Webb, we have an intruder." From a side corridor emerged Silas Webb, the plantation overseer, flanked by 2 men carrying shotguns. Their expression suggested they'd be happy for an excuse to use them. The standoff was interrupted by Caroline Tremaine's return, her dress mud-splattered, her pistol still in hand. "Mother, Josephine and that new house slave are trying to escape through the North Fields with one of the breeding women." Eleanor's focus shifted immediately. "Stop them at all costs. The documents they've taken could destroy everything we've built." Caroline hesitated, glancing between her mother and Blackwood. "And what about him?" "Detain him," Eleanor ordered the armed men. "I'll deal with his federal friends myself." As Webb and his men advanced on Blackwood, a tremendous crash of breaking glass shattered the tension. Through a large window at the end of the corridor came Beatrice Tremaine, wielding a heavy branch as a club, her face a mask of righteous fury. Behind her, through the broken window, Blackwood could see torches approaching. His marshals had responded to the signal. "Stop!" Beatrice shouted, brandishing her makeshift weapon. "It's over, Mother!" "I've sent copies of Father's journals and your breeding records to Judge Holloway, Reverend Whitfield, and the Charleston Mercury newspaper. By morning, everyone in South Carolina will know what you've done." Eleanor's face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare bring such shame on this family." "This family?" Beatrice's laugh held no humor. "We're not a family. We're specimens in your twisted experiment." She turned to Caroline. "Did you know, sister, that we weren't born of Eleanor, but carried by slaves? That our true mothers were disposed of once they'd served their purpose?" Caroline's hand, still gripping the pistol, began to tremble. "It was necessary," she whispered, but doubt had crept into her voice. "For the advancement of the bloodline." "Ah, it was monstrous," Beatrice countered, "and it ends tonight." The thunder of approaching hooves signaled the arrival of Blackwood's reinforcements. Eleanor, seeing her control slipping away, made one last, desperate play. "Webb," she commanded, "burn the infirmary, destroy all evidence. I'll claim it was a tragic accident during the storm." Before Webb could act, Blackwood drew his service revolver. "That would be multiple counts of murder, Mrs. Tremaine. My men are already evacuating the women." Outside, shouts and the glow of torches confirmed his statement. Federal marshals were surrounding the building, while others led disoriented women from the infirmary's main entrance. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. With a shriek of rage, she lunged at Beatrice, hands curved into claws. "Ungrateful child, after everything I've done to improve our line." Caroline moved with startling speed, placing herself between her mother and younger sister. "No, Mother," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "No more." In that moment of distraction, Dr. Parnell attempted to flee through a side door. Webb and his men, seeing the tide turn, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. As federal marshals flooded the corridor, securing Eleanor Tremaine and her accomplices, Blackwood turned his attention to finding Josephine and Isaiah. They had been heading north toward the rice fields that bordered the Cooper River. If they reached the water, they might find passage on a northern-bound vessel. Outside, the storm was beginning to abate, the rain reduced to a steady drizzle. Dawn was still hours away, but torchlight transformed the plantation grounds into a chaotic patchwork of light and shadow. Blackwood commandeered a horse from one of his men and rode hard toward the north fields, praying he would reach the fugitives before Eleanor's loyal overseers did. Behind him, the Tremaine mansion stood silent and dark, its white columns now seeming less like Greek Revival elegance and more like the bars of a prison that had finally, mercifully, been broken open. Josephine Tremaine had never known true darkness until she fled through the north fields of her family's plantation that night. The storm clouds had swallowed the moon and stars, leaving only the occasional lightning flash to illuminate the path ahead. Beside her ran Isaiah, supporting his sister Ruth, who stumbled frequently after months of confinement had weakened her legs. The infant strapped to Ruth's chest whimpered softly, a sound almost lost beneath the persistent drumming of rain. "We need to reach the river before dawn," Isaiah urged as they paused briefly in a stand of cypress trees. "There's a freedman who runs a ferry. He'll take us north if we can pay." Josephine clutched the oilskin-wrapped bundle of documents to her chest. "I have these. And this." She removed a velvet pouch from her bodice, revealing a heavy gold locket set with pearls. "It was my grandmother's. It should buy our passage." Ruth's breathing was labored, her face pale in the darkness. "The baby," she whispered. "He's cold." Josephine immediately removed her woolen shawl, wrapping it around the infant. Her own dress was soaked through, her bare feet bleeding from the sharp stones and brambles they had traversed. None of it mattered. For the first time in her life, Josephine Tremaine was acting according to her own moral compass, not the perverse value system that had governed Tremaine Plantation. "Can you continue?" Isaiah asked his sister gently. Ruth nodded, though her exhaustion was evident. "Anywhere is better than back there." They pressed on, skirting the edge of a rice field where the embankment provided slightly firmer footing. The Cooper River lay less than a mile ahead, but between them and freedom stretched open ground that offered little cover. "Listen," Isaiah said suddenly, raising a hand to halt them. Through the diminishing rainfall came the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders moving fast from the direction of the plantation. "They're coming," Josephine whispered. "We need to hide." Isaiah scanned their surroundings with desperate eyes. "There!" He pointed to a drainage culvert that ran beneath the raised path between rice fields. "It's not much, but it might conceal us until they pass." The three fugitives scrambled down the slippery embankment and squeezed into the narrow brick tunnel. Water rushed around their ankles, cold and brackish. Ruth clutched her infant tighter, pressing herself against the curved wall of the culvert. Josephine held the precious documents above the waterline, knowing they represented their only hope of bringing Eleanor Tremaine to justice. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed directly above them. Male voices called to each other, indistinct but clearly searching. A lantern beam swept the area, reflecting off the standing water in the rice field. "Spread out!" came a voice Josephine recognized as Silas Webb's. "Check every ditch, every hollow. Mrs. Tremaine wants them found before sunrise." Another voice responded, "What about the federal men? They're swarming the main house and the infirmary." "Damn them!" Webb cursed. "All the more reason to find the girl and the runaways first. She has papers that could hang us all." The searchers moved methodically along the embankment, their lanterns creating dancing patterns on the water's surface. In their hiding place, Josephine and her companions pressed themselves flatter against the bricks, hardly daring to breathe. The baby, sensing the tension, began to fuss. Ruth rocked him gently, terror evident in her eyes. If he cried out now. A horse stopped directly above the culvert. They could hear the animal's heavy breathing, the creak of saddle leather as its rider dismounted. Footsteps approached the edge of the embankment. "Anything down there?" called another searcher. There was a pause as the man apparently surveyed the drainage ditch. "Just water and mud," he finally responded. "They must have gone toward the old mill instead." The footsteps retreated, the rider remounted, and gradually the search party moved away, their voices and lanterns fading into the distance. Isaiah waited until he could no longer hear them before speaking. "We can't stay here, the tide's coming in. This whole area will be underwater within an hour." They extracted themselves from the culvert, even more mud-covered and drenched than before. Ruth was shivering violently now, her face alarmingly pale. "I don't know if I can go much further," she admitted, swaying slightly on her feet. Josephine made a quick decision. "We need to separate. Isaiah, take Ruth and the baby to the river. I'll create a diversion, lead the searchers in another direction." "No," Isaiah protested. "We stay together." "Listen to me," Josephine insisted. "Ruth needs immediate help. The baby, too. I can move faster alone, draw them away from you." "And the documents?" Josephine hesitated, then divided the bundle, giving half to Isaiah. "Insurance," she explained. "If either of us is captured, the other might still succeed." It was a grim calculation, but a necessary one. After a moment, Isaiah nodded reluctantly. "The ferry launches from a cove near the old Indigo warehouse," he said. "The boatman is called Moses. Tell him Isaiah sent you and give him this." He pressed a small, carved wooden figure into her hand, a token of some sort, its significance unknown to Josephine. "I'll find you there," she promised, though all three knew the odds were against it. They parted ways at the edge of the rice field, Isaiah and Ruth heading directly for the river, while Josephine struck out toward the old mill, intending to circle back to the rendezvous point once she had drawn away the pursuers. The rain had finally stopped, though clouds still obscured the stars. Josephine moved as quietly as possible along the edge of a cotton field, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the horizon. She had nearly reached the abandoned mill when a voice called out behind her. "Josephine!" She froze, recognizing Lieutenant Blackwood's voice. Turning slowly, she saw him approaching on horseback, alone and without a lantern. He reined in his mount several yards away. "Don't run," he said quickly. "I'm not here to capture you." Josephine remained poised to flee. "You were working with my mother." "I was investigating her," Blackwood corrected. Federal investigation into illegal slave breeding. I'm here to help you. Why should I believe you? Because right now, federal marshals are arresting Eleanor Tremaine, Dr. Impanel, and everyone involved in the infirmary operation. Your sister Beatrice is safe. She's the one who alerted us to your escape. Josephine's knees nearly buckled with relief. Beatrice is safe? What about Caroline? She surrendered peacefully. It seems seeing your mother attack Beatrice finally broke her loyalty. Blackwood dismounted, approaching slowly with his hands visible. Where are the others? The house slave and his sister? Josephine hesitated, still uncertain whether to trust him. Why do you want to know? Because Webb and his men are still searching for you, and they're desperate. The documents you took could implicate half of Charleston's elite. There are people who would kill to prevent that information becoming public. Before she could respond, a gunshot cracked through the night air, coming from the direction of the river. Josephine's blood ran cold. Isaiah and Ruth, she whispered. Blackwood was immediately back on his horse, extending a hand down to her. Come on, we can reach them faster together. Abandoning caution, Josephine grabbed his arm and allowed herself to be pulled up behind him. The horse lunged forward at Blackwood's command, racing toward the Cooper River and the sound of conflict. They emerged from a stand of trees to find a scene of chaos at the riverside. Webb and 3 overseers had intercepted Isaiah and Ruth near a small wooden dock, where a flat-bottomed ferry was moored. Isaiah was engaged in a desperate struggle with 2 of the men, while Webb held Ruth at gunpoint, the baby wailing in her arms. "Stop right there, federal man," Webb shouted as he spotted Blackwood's approach. "This is plantation business." Blackwood reined in the horse, assessing the situation with a soldier's precision. "It's over, Webb. Mrs. Tremaine is already in custody. Put down the gun." Webb's face contorted with fury and fear. "You think that matters? There are bigger interests at stake than one plantation mistress. Governors, judges, businessmen across 3 states, all invested in what we built here." "All the more reason to end this peacefully," Blackwood replied, his voice steady. "Those men will disavow any knowledge of these activities once they're exposed. They won't protect you, Webb." While this exchange unfolded, Josephine slipped from the horse's back, circling around toward the riverbank. Isaiah had managed to subdue 1 overseer and was grappling with the second. Ruth stood trembling, Webb's pistol pressed against her temple. What happened next occurred in a matter of heartbeats. The ferry operator, Moses presumably, emerged from his cabin armed with a gaff hook. Webb, momentarily distracted, turned his pistol toward this new threat. In that split second, Josephine charged forward and slammed into him with all her strength. The impact sent both of them tumbling down the muddy bank into the shallows of the Cooper River. Webb's pistol discharged harmlessly into the air before disappearing beneath the dark water. Josephine struggled to her feet, gasping for breath, only to find Webb lunging at her with a knife that had appeared from his boot. "You ruined everything!" he snarled, slashing wildly. Josephine stumbled backward, her foot catching on a submerged root. As she fell, she saw Lieutenant Blackwood's arm extend, his service revolver aimed squarely at Webb. The overseer froze, knife still raised. "It's finished," Blackwood stated with absolute finality. For a moment, it seemed Webb might still attack, choosing death over capture, but self-preservation won out. The knife dropped from his hand, disappearing into the murky water. Within minutes, more federal marshals arrived, having heard the gunshot. Webb and his remaining men were taken into custody. Ruth was immediately attended to by a physician who had accompanied the federal party, while her baby was wrapped in dry blankets. As dawn broke over the Cooper River, Josephine found herself seated on a crate by the ferry landing, a woolen blanket draped around her shoulders. Isaiah sat nearby, watching as his sister was tended to aboard the ferry. "You risked everything," he said quietly, "for people you didn't even know." Josephine stared out at the river, where the first light of day was turning the water to molten gold. "I risked everything to stop a monstrous wrong, one my family perpetrated for generations. What will you do now?" It was a question Josephine had not allowed herself to consider until this moment. The Tremaine plantation, her inheritance, her place in Charleston society, all of it was built on unspeakable evil. "Testify," she said finally. "Make sure the truth is known, no matter who it implicates. After that," she shrugged, "I don't know. Start again somewhere else, somewhere I'm not a Tremaine." Lieutenant Blackwood approached, his uniform mud-stained, but his bearing still military precise. "The documents you saved will be crucial evidence," he told them. "Though I should warn you, there will be powerful people who'll try to suppress this case." "Let them try," Josephine replied, a new strength in her voice. "Some truths can't be buried forever." As the sun continued its ascent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a northbound steamer appeared around the river bend. For Isaiah and Ruth, it represented a path to freedom. For Josephine, it offered something different but equally precious, the chance to define herself by her own actions rather than the Tremaine legacy of cruelty and exploitation. The choice she made that morning, to board that steamer alongside Isaiah and Ruth, would forever alter the course of her life, and perhaps, in some small way, begin to balance the scales of justice so long tipped against those her family had enslaved. Charleston, South Carolina, November 1836. The courthouse stood imposing and white in the crisp autumn sunlight, its classical columns and pediment projecting an aura of impartial justice that the proceedings inside would soon put to the test. A crowd had gathered on the broad steps and spilled into Meeting Street, their murmured conversations creating a constant background hum like disturbed bees. This was no ordinary trial. For nearly 3 months, Charleston had been convulsed by revelations about the Tremaine plantation and its breeding program. Newspapers as far away as Boston and London had reported on the Charleston atrocity, as it had come to be known. The case had split South Carolina society, with many prominent families closing ranks around their own, while others, particularly those with northern business connections, called for full accountability. Inside the packed courtroom, Eleanor Tremaine sat ramrod straight at the defendant's table, her black widow's weeds replaced by a severe grey dress that did nothing to soften her appearance. Beside her, Dr. Maxwell Parnell stared blankly ahead, his professional detachment now serving as emotional armor against the disgust directed at him from every corner of the room. At a separate table sat Silas Webb and 3 other overseers, their workplace hierarchy dissolved by shared captivity and the common charges they faced. Caroline Tremaine was notably absent from the proceedings, having been declared unfit to stand trial after suffering what her physicians described as a complete nervous collapse following her arrest. Judge Solomon Pierce entered, and the crowded room rose as one. Pierce's appointment to preside over this case had raised eyebrows throughout Charleston. A relative newcomer to South Carolina, having moved from Pennsylvania only 5 years earlier, he was considered less entangled in local alliances than most of his colleagues on the bench. "Be seated," he commanded, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the papers before him. "We resume the testimony of Miss Josephine Tremaine." All heads turned as Josephine was escorted to the witness stand by a federal marshal. 3 months had transformed her from a sheltered plantation daughter to a woman visibly carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. Her once fashionable dress had been replaced by a simple blue frock, her hair pulled back severely from a face that had lost its softness. She did not look at her mother as she was sworn in, focusing instead on a point somewhere above the heads of the spectators. "Miss Tremaine," began the federal prosecutor, a stern man named Aldrich who had been dispatched from Washington specifically for this case. "Yesterday you testified about the documents you recovered from your mother's hidden laboratory. Today, I would like you to tell the court what you personally witnessed regarding the treatment of slave women in what was called the infirmary." Josephine's hands clasped tightly in her lap were the only outward sign of her distress as she began to speak. The women were kept isolated from the main slave population. They were selected based on physical characteristics. My mother and Dr. Parnell considered desirable: strength, height, particular features. Once chosen, they were housed in the building called the infirmary, where they were— She paused, searching for words clinical enough to speak in mixed company. Impregnated according to a schedule maintained by my mother. And how was this impregnation accomplished? Eleanor Tremaine's attorney, a corpulent man named Hollister, who represented several prominent Charleston families, rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. These details are unnecessarily prurient and offensive to public decency. Your Honor, countered Prosecutor Aldrich, the specific methods employed at Tremaine Plantation speak directly to the systematic and calculated nature of these crimes. They are essential to establishing intent. Judge Pierce considered briefly. Objection overruled. The witness will answer the question. Josephine took a deep breath. Selected male slaves were used as breeders. They were chosen for specific physical traits and paired with women based on my mother's breeding charts. The act itself was often forced and supervised by overseers or sometimes by Dr. Parnell, who would record details in his scientific journals. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several ladies raised handkerchiefs to their faces, though whether in genuine distress or for the appearance of delicacy was impossible to determine. And what happened after these women became pregnant? They received better food than other slaves, regular medical attention from Dr. Parnell, and were exempt from field labor. After delivery, they were allowed a brief recovery period before the process began again, and the infants, if healthy and showing the desired traits, they were taken from their mothers, usually within a month of birth. Those born with any defect or undesirable characteristic— Here Josephine faltered for the first time. Judge Pierce leaned forward. Take your time, Miss Tremaine. After composing herself, Josephine continued. Those deemed unacceptable were either sold cheaply to other plantations or used for Dr. Parnell's research. The ones he kept are documented in the specimen jars found in the laboratory. The gallery erupted in shocked exclamations. Judge Pierce banged his gavel repeatedly for order. Miss Tremaine, the prosecutor continued when quiet had been restored, you have testified that this program began under your father's direction. What changes occurred after your mother assumed control of the plantation? She expanded it significantly. My father had experimented with selective breeding among slaves, but my mother systematized the process and introduced new elements. What elements specifically? Josephine looked directly at Eleanor for the first time. Something passed between mother and daughter, not remorse or forgiveness, but a cold acknowledgement of irrevocable breach. She began using surrogate mothers to bear children fathered by men, selected for specific traits. These children were then raised as legitimate members of prominent families. Another wave of muttering swept the courtroom. This allegation had been hinted at in newspaper accounts, but never so explicitly stated in court. Are you suggesting, Miss Tremaine, that your mother arranged for the birth of children who were then presented as the natural offspring of Charleston society women? Yes, and in some cases as her own children. The implication hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor Tremaine's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table before her. Do you have evidence of this practice? The documents recovered from the laboratory include detailed records of lineage, surrogate mothers, and the placement of resulting children. Additionally, Josephine's voice dropped slightly, forcing the entire room to lean forward to hear her. Additionally, I have reason to believe that I myself am the product of such an arrangement. The sensation this caused was immediate and profound. Ladies gasped audibly. Gentlemen exchanged glances of shock, and Judge Pierce was forced to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Eleanor Tremaine finally broke her stoic facade, rising halfway from her seat before her attorney firmly pulled her back down, whispering urgently in her ear. The prosecutor allowed the impact of this revelation to settle before continuing. "Miss Tremaine, this is an extraordinary claim. What evidence supports it?" "Among my mother's private papers was a document detailing my birth to a house slave named Mercy in 1814. According to these records, my biological father was a visiting French physician noted for his intellectual accomplishments. I was taken from Mercy immediately and presented to Charleston society as the natural daughter of William and Eleanor Tremaine." "And what became of Mercy?" "The record indicates she died of complications 6 months after my birth. I believe she was murdered to protect the secret." At this, Eleanor Tremaine could no longer be restrained. "Lies!" she shrieked, rising to her feet. "Vicious, ungrateful lies from a daughter I raised with every advantage." "Mrs. Tremaine, you will be seated," Judge Pierce thundered. "One more outburst, and you will be removed from this courtroom." Eleanor subsided, her face contorted with fury. Dr. Parnell, beside her, had closed his eyes, perhaps finally recognizing the inevitability of their downfall. The testimony continued for another hour, with Josephine methodically describing the operations of the breeding program, the involvement of each defendant, and the extent of the documentation she had secured. Throughout, she maintained the composure that had characterized her presence in court, faltering only when describing the conditions endured by women like Ruth, Isaiah's sister. When the prosecutor finally concluded his questioning, Eleanor's attorney approached the witness stand with the confident air of a man prepared to discredit an inconvenient accuser. "Miss Tremaine," Hollister began, his tone condescendingly gentle, "you have made some truly extraordinary allegations here today. Allegations that, if believed, would damage not only your mother, but numerous respected families throughout the South. I must ask, what motivates such a daughter to turn on her mother in this fashion?" Josephine met his gaze steadily. "Justice, Mr. Hollister." "Justice," he repeated with a theatrical skepticism, "not perhaps resentment over your mother's discipline, or jealousy of your sister Caroline's favored position. Perhaps even delusions resulting from a fragile, nervous constitution." "Objection," called the prosecutor. "Counsel is badgering the witness and suggesting mental incapacity without medical evidence." "Sustained," ruled Judge Pierce. "Mr. Hollister, confine yourself to relevant questions about the witness's testimony." Hollister adjusted his approach. "Miss Tremaine, you claim these documents prove your allegations, yet many of them are in your own handwriting, your journal entries, your observations. Couldn't these be fabrications created to harm your mother?" "The journal entries are corroborated by the plantation ledgers, Doctor. Parnell's research notes and the testimony of over 20 women rescued from the infirmary," Josephine replied evenly. "My observations simply connected evidence that already existed." Hollister tried several more angles of attack, suggesting Josephine had misinterpreted innocent medical research, had been manipulated by abolitionists, or was seeking to establish herself as sole heir to the Tremaine fortune by disgracing her mother and sister. Each attempt bounced off Josephine's unshakable testimony. Finally, with poorly concealed frustration, Hollister played his last card. "Miss Tremaine, is it not true that you fled the plantation in the company of slaves, that you actively assisted in their escape in violation of both state law and your family's property rights?" "I fled with Isaiah and Ruth to escape those who would have silenced us to protect their crimes," Josephine replied. "And human beings cannot be property, Mr. Hollister, regardless of what our laws currently claim." A collective intake of breath greeted this statement. Even in a federal court, such openly abolitionist sentiment was shocking, coming from the daughter of a plantation owner. Hollister pounced. "Ah, so you admit to harboring abolitionist sympathies. Could these not be the true motivation behind your campaign against your mother and the traditions of our society?" Josephine sat straighter in the witness chair. My motivation is truth, Mr. Hollister. What occurred at Tremaine Plantation went beyond the ordinary evils of slavery into something monstrous. My mother didn't just claim ownership of people's bodies. She claimed ownership of their bloodlines, their children, their very futures. She violated not only human dignity, but also the sensibilities of decent society, regardless of their position on slavery. Hollister had no effective response. He returned to his seat, murmuring that he had no further questions. As Josephine stepped down from the witness stand, her gaze met Lieutenant Blackwood's, where he sat among the federal officials. The slight nod he gave her carried more validation than any words could have conveyed. The trial concluded 3 days later. Despite the powerful interests aligned to protect Eleanor Tremaine, the evidence was simply too overwhelming, too grotesque to be dismissed. Eleanor and Dr. Parnell were sentenced to life imprisonment. Silas Webb and the overseers received lesser but still substantial sentences. The fate of the Tremaine plantation itself became a subject of national debate. Eventually, under Josephine's insistence and with federal supervision, the land was divided among the former slaves who had worked it, creating one of the first such settlements of freed people before the Civil War. Spring 1850, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The modest brick townhouse on Walnut Street gave little indication of its occupant's extraordinary history. Its window boxes bloomed with early spring flowers, and children's laughter occasionally drifted from the small garden behind. Josephine Blackwood, formerly Tremaine, sat at her writing desk, completing the final pages of a manuscript that had consumed much of the past year. The 14 years since the Charleston trial had transformed her from a sheltered plantation daughter into a respected, if controversial, writer and advocate. A knock at the study door interrupted her concentration. "Come in!" she called, setting aside her pen. Lieutenant, now Colonel, James Blackwood entered, their 10-year-old daughter Ruth at his side. The girl, named for Isaiah's sister, carried a letter bearing a Charleston postmark. "This just arrived," James said, his expression suggesting he had already guessed its contents. Josephine opened it with steady hands, quickly scanning the single paragraph within. "Eleanor Tremaine died yesterday in the state prison," she said quietly. "Pneumonia, according to the warden." Little Ruth, who knew only fragments of her family's history, looked between her parents uncertainly. "Was she a bad person, Mother?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "She was a person who did terrible things," she finally answered. "Sometimes it's hard to separate the two." Later that evening, after Ruth had been put to bed, Josephine and James sat in their small garden. The manuscript, her account of the Tremaine plantation and its aftermath, lay complete on her desk inside. "Will you publish it under your name?" James asked, knowing the controversy it would cause even in Philadelphia. "Yes," Josephine replied. "The truth deserves a name attached to it, even a name with such a troubled legacy as Tremaine." She gazed up at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. "I received a letter from Isaiah last week. The settlement on the old plantation lands is thriving. They've established a school." James took her hand. "You've done what you could to make amends." "Not amends," Josephine corrected gently. "Justice. There's a difference." As night fell over Philadelphia, Josephine thought of all those whose lives had been scarred by the Tremaine plantation. The women in the infirmary, their stolen children, even Caroline, who had died in an asylum 3 years after the trial. She thought, too, of Beatrice, who had found a measure of peace as a teacher in Boston. The story she had written would shock many, but truth often did. In exposing the horrors of her family's past, Josephine hoped to contribute to a future where such atrocities would be unimaginable. A future still distant, but perhaps possible if enough people found the courage to confront the darkest chapters of their shared history. From her desk drawer, she withdrew a small carved wooden token, the one Isaiah had given her on that rain-soaked night of their escape. It had become her talisman, a reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, courage and conscience could prevail. The widow of Charleston's legacy had finally been laid to rest, not in a family mausoleum, but in the pages of truth that would outlive them all.